Hello, this is Deborah Anderson, the Black Woman Animator, coming back to you with another video. And in this video, I'm introducing the Ally Corner. So I did like a kind of all call to allies out in the animation community if they wanted to provide any information to my viewers. And so anybody who responded, I'll be highlighting on the Ally Corner. And in this video, I have Chrissy. Thank you for offering your talents and coming on the Black Woman Animator YouTube channel. And I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and then get right into it.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to talk about storyboarding. So my name's Chrissy Fellmeth. I've been working in the New York City animation scene for about 14 years now, which is kind of crazy to me. Up until about 2 or 3 years ago, I was strictly a 2D animator. I would do layouts too, but I decided I wanted to take a different trajectory with my career, so now I'm doing mostly storyboarding work. And I now also teach at the School of Visual Arts here in New York. And I'm also co-lead for New York City's Women in Animation chapter, and we do a lot of outreach to students and for the professionals in the New York City area to, you know, help everybody with their careers. So,
nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us what you'll be demoing and teaching us today.
Yeah, so I'm just going to be giving you all like kind of like storyboarding 101 rundown of the most important parts of storyboarding. I unfortunately cannot give you my 15-week course. You'd have to sign up for it. Mm-hmm. But I will definitely give you an overview of like things that I teach and things that you can do to become a better storyboard artist. So I'm going to share my screen. One of the first things I want to talk about is the many types of shots that you can have. This is basic. This is basically the beginning information that you would get when you're starting to storyboard. You need to start thinking about like the different types of angles and how they can like tell your story better. There's basic stuff like your straight on shot is pretty much the #1 shot that people will use. There's up shots and down shots, all kinds of different stuff. This graphic has like a ton of information on it. And we also go into what closeness you get to, like extreme close-ups. I mean, and this is just like a general guide. You could go even more extreme with these close-ups and long shots, but this is just a generic, basic overview of the types of shots I'll be talking about. When you're doing storyboarding, they don't call it zooming in and zooming out like they do with like Photoshop or anything. It's called trucking in and trucking out. So trucking in would be the camera going from wide to closer, and trucking out would be the camera going from closer to wider. You can have camera rotations, you can have camera shakes. That's like kind of like what they do in cartoons when like something really heavy hits the ground. There's panning, which is moving the camera across a scene or vertically, such as in this instance with this really big dude. The camera would start at his feet and pan up. There's a whip pan, which is like the camera moving so fast it's a blur. And then you have a few transitions in here, which is like ripple dissolve, fade in, fade out, and cross dissolve stuff. You can also do wipes. But those are basic transitions. There's a million different ways you could do transitions, and they're far more creative than just doing these, but these are your basics. Yeah, cool. Any questions on that?
Not so far.
Cool. I feel like a lot of people know most of this stuff, but it's a good place to start thinking about. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things you really need to start thinking about when you're planning your boards is what you need to show and how you need to show it. So as a storyboard artist, you might get a script, or you might be working on a board-driven show, and there's a major difference between the two. So if you are working on a script-driven show, meaning there's a writer and you get a script and you have audio and all that, you're basically tasked with interpreting the script into a visual. And then there's storyboard-driven shows where you have to like pitch your idea for the episode. Like you'll get a very basic rundown of like what the episode like plot would be, and then you're tasked with figuring out the jokes, figuring out the story, and telling it the best way. You'll see like those old Disney video pictures of like everybody in a big room and like somebody's like pointing at all the little pictures on a cork board. Those are like board pitch meetings, and board artists have to sit in front of each other and critique each other's work, and it's kind of terrifying. I have not had the pleasure of being on a storyboard or on a board-driven show yet. I would absolutely love to be on one because that's one of my favorite things to do is visually tell jokes. Like things like SpongeBob are great examples of board-driven shows. And a great example of like a script-driven show is one that I've worked on called Our Cartoon President. That's on Showtime.
My cousin just introduced me to that.
Yeah, did you watch a few?
Yeah, I was like, wow, the likeness of these characters, like, I mean, I don't know all of the politicians, but if I did, I'd be like, wow, that looks just like them.
I mean, I gotta say, I didn't know all the politicians either until I started, and then I was like, oh yeah, they do look like that. The caricature artists, like the character designers for that show, are just, they're amazing talents, and I wish that I could draw like that.
So do you know if there's a particular reason why a person would choose a script-driven show or a storyboard-driven show? Like, is there, because off the top of my head, I'm like, okay, SpongeBob is storyboard-driven, so it's like the more jokes there are, would it benefit to be storyboard-driven, or is there a reason, or just it just sometimes happens?
I mean, most children's television, or like young adult television, I'll say, is board driven because kids love like the visual gags. Like I feel like it's more difficult to write a script with a visual gag in mind, you know, unless it's like a one-off. And working for like a script-driven show like Our Cartoon President, like the writers pretty much have the entire say over what's funny, because it's very much based on like what is in the script. A lot of adult television, like Adult Swim shows, are like that, because the writers are writing the jokes into the show. It's not so much like goofy humor with two characters hitting each other over the head with a hammer, you know. So yeah, that would be the main difference of like what that would be working like, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the two types of shows that you could end up working on. And then there's, of course, there's film, which I don't personally have any experience with. I wish I did, but I feel like film is a mix of the two, where the board artists are tasked with, you know, really boarding out the show, but they're also given a script. But that's just from me looking on from the outside in. I'm not an expert on that. One of the most important roles of storyboarding is the 180 rule, which is maintaining screen side throughout your storyboards. There's ways to get your audience from one side of the screen to, or your characters from one side of the screen to the other, but you have to take your audience with you. You can't just swap them on screen and expect people to understand. It's very confusing visually. So you'll notice here in this particular panel that this guy is on the left and this dog guy is on the right. And that is maintained when you're switching where the camera is, meaning the camera goes from behind the guy to behind the dog. And then we go back to a wide, still maintaining where they are on the left and the right. But then suddenly they're swapped. And that's extremely confusing to look at when you're following storyboards. So I think that this is one of the most difficult things about storyboarding, because in reality, like, you could just switch where you are, where you're looking, and it's fine. Like, you still visually get it. But when you're trying to tell a story visually, it gets difficult. And like, sometimes you don't even notice that you broke it until somebody else looks at your boards and they're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And you have to fix it. So this is something that you have to keep in mind the entire time that you're boarding. Otherwise you will lose your audience. So, and with that in mind, there's also the rule of thirds, which is really like, it applies to basically everything in art. Of course, this isn't like the 180 rule where it's like the be all end all. This is kind of just like a visual way to make a panel appealing. And I've tried to find information as to why the rule of thirds is like the best way to compose a frame, and I could not find any. So please, anybody, if you know, can you write it in the comments so that I can be further educated on that? But the rule of thirds is basically splitting your panel into thirds. And when you've done that, you have pretty much the basic idea of like where you can set things up in your frame that it makes it visually appealing. It also helps direct your audience in a certain direction, and gives your audience the idea of where they should be focusing. So for example, I'm just going to draw a quick rough frame. There's this tree and this hill. There's this guy looking down like he just got here. Distance, there's like the evil castle or something, you know.
And can you like quickly talk about, or you don't have to quickly do it, but how the like drawing style of storyboarding, how maybe beginners will draw much more detail than is required?
Yes. So the process for doing storyboards generally, the first thing you'll do, this is what I always do anyway. I just do like what we call thumbnails. They're tiny, tiny, tiny little drawings. And it's just like, I'm going to have character A here, and then character B in the foreground, and then character B here, character A in the foreground, and then, you know, character B punches character A in the face. But this is like the super rough first pass of doing your boards. It's just like getting the idea down on into little tiny drawings that like, that took me less than a minute to make 3 panels, right? So you're getting the ideas out, laying them down, and then figuring out if it's working. Some people do far more detailed thumbnails than this, but I find it to be like just a place for you to get your ideas out, figure out if they're working, get rid of the bad drawings, get rid of the bad ideas that you have, and improve upon the ideas that you think are good. You know what I mean? So like, you lay out a scene and then you're thinking like, oh, I could have actually like made this panel better or that panel better. So this is step 1, quick, very quick. Step 2 would be something like this, where you're giving it a rough pass. maybe don't draw this poorly, but you're laying out your scene and you're like describing it visually for your director to look at. And then what you would take from here, like what it's called, actually I have a picture for it. It's called Shorthand. And that's basically creating a shortcut for drawing. Okay, so it's called Shorthand. This is a picture I found on the internet, basically describing the idea of shorthand. So you're missing all of the very minor details of your character, but you're still giving the details that are important, that make that character look like that character. So, for example, I feel like this is a little too detailed for shorthand, but it's kind of, this is good shorthand. So like you're not getting all of SpongeBob's little wavy things, you're not getting all the little circles on him, but like the shoes are there, it's definitely him, his eyes and expression are there. That's really the most important part, is your acting. Same thing going for Squidward here. Like I don't like his collar's there, but I don't even really think that's necessary. Including stuff that gives the character volume, like the bottom of their shirt. That's important because that's helping show, like, again, like stuff like line of action, and giving volume to your drawings. But that is what your like shorthand should be. This way you're still drawing quickly and you're still getting your ideas across, but you're not using all of your line mileage. Line mileage is like how long it takes you to draw something. And in animation, it's like the difference between a project taking a month and a project taking a year, because of all the details that need to be added. So I remember working on a show once where the bad guy was half cyborg and half ogre. So he wasn't symmetrical, which already makes it difficult. And then it was just like, it was like the most overly detailed thing I had ever seen in my life. And he also had like 9 mechanical bladed tails. And we were sending the show overseas to get animated, and we sent it to the overseas studio, and they just came back and said no. They're just like, we're not doing that, because it would have been nigh impossible. So they just like threw a cloak over it. They're just like, no, he's still half cyborg, half ogre. Just, you know, put a cloak over him and he can't tell.
Right.
But anyway, so like line mileage is really important for like getting things done quickly and economically, and that's extremely important for storyboarding. This would be, again, like this is like your super rough first pass, and then when you're cleaning up, like you're making sure that you're getting in a little bit more of the details, and it doesn't look as awful as you drew it the first time. One of the things that I absolutely just abhor doing, it's just like my least favorite part, is like doing all the backgrounds. It's not my, like I like focusing on character acting and all of that stuff. But the one thing that I do like about specifically Storyboard Pro is that there is a perspective tool in here. So you can like set up your little guide and then lock it, and then get your perspective lines in should you need them. But yeah, so anyway, with rule of thirds, you're basically helping draw your audience's eyes to specific parts of your frame. In fact, I'm even a little off with this. But it's not, it's like the rule of thirds, but it's not the only rule. There's plenty of other ways that you can set up a shot to be a good composition. One one of the things that you can look at visually to get ideas for this stuff. And like a lot of new shows that are coming out, I can't remember, I don't think it's Owl House, but there was a new show that came out, and they specifically hired comic book artists to do storyboards, because they already have like a great visual sense for composition. So like I found that like studying comic books is a great way to learn more about setting up your shots and doing a good composition. It's also a great lesson in leading the eye, because in comic books you have to lead your reader through the page, which is even more difficult than trying to lead your audience through a screen. Continuing on with the idea of setting up compositions. It's something that you find in comic books, in storyboarding, in illustration work, in photography, using lines to draw your audience's eye. This is a pretty cool and clear example of like, obviously like they're implied lines. They're not in your panels, but they're things that draw you to look at a certain area. So like it's very subtle, but the lights, the angle of the motorcycle on this side, her leg, and the sword, and obviously the angle of the motorcycle are all drawing you to her face. Here's another idea of rule of thirds. So it's not just horizontal, it's also vertical, and like splitting your panels into like volumes of thirds. So like this obviously isn't like a straight line in this instance, but in terms of like screen area that it's taking up, it's about a third. It gives you a sense of depth in your panels. You can create a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, which is also extremely important, is creating depth within your panels. Like you're trying to recreate the visuals of life. So we all live in a 3D space and you're trying to translate it into 2D. So you don't want your panels to come out flat. That's kind of boring to look at. So like I was saying before, there shapes within composition. Like you can have the S shape, which is very clearly things that would be like a river or a road, but it doesn't necessarily just have to be that. There's a ton to choose from. I'll pull this up. These are kind of wild, but again, they're ideas of compositions that you can use. One of, oh God, it's Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones loves to use the diagonal one. This one down here in the corner. I have a Bugs Bunny that I can pull up. Yeah, loves to use it. Loves these diagonal lines. Really like, it's subtle, but it's a way to draw focus to specific areas within your panels, like without doing it directly. Using, like you can use the L, this one is all about the L shape, which is using it to like do like landscapes and stuff. So like L for landscapes. Having like a strong vertical and strong horizontal gives like height to things. So like a giant castle would obviously have that. Or you can also make things look very flat and short by using this, by just giving it a slight vertical. This is an idea of that S shape I was talking about. Again, it's not like a straight up S, but it's a road that's kind of like leading you from foreground to middle ground to background. There's this adorable kitty cat, which it might be really washed out, but like it starts at the bottom of his tail, leads through him, and then out this way. I think it's Shane Glines uses S curves, and specifically his designs and drawings, and they're just beautiful. He made a book called S Curves, and I think he came out with a second one. I'm really upset that I don't have a copy because it would be great material to study, but they're great to use in drawings. These are again like more diagonals. Using diagonals and like sending your ground plane into a diagonal gives like a sense of unease. So like really scary things happen in diagonals, really dramatic things happen in diagonals. But it's again just like leading you through your scene, through your panel, taking your audience from one side to the other, or through a specific motion, as would be in this one. Using triangles is another great way to set up your compositions. It's really great for setting the relationship up between three characters. In this one, you're getting the sense that she's kind of in trouble, just based on the mood of it. But it helps with like conversational pieces and things like that. Yeah. Using frame within a frame compositions, I love these. They're so cool, I think. Like looking through things like a window, openings of caves, using your backgrounds to your advantage to frame your panels to really draw your viewer's eye to a specific area. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a great way to set up your panels. It will, yeah, I'm just going to skip that sentence. Using repetition of objects is a great way to give depth to your panels. So like these windows are freaking huge. These windows are not so huge. So you're kind of like setting up the viewer to know that things are going further back, railroad tracks, electrical lines. And in this particular comic book panel, it's the repetition of the cars. So we know like these ones are obviously much smaller, so they're further away. And it also like helps guide your audience through your panels. Oh, do you want to play?
Yes. Hopefully I'll be decent.
So I pulled a lot of Frank Frazetta paintings for this.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you think about this one?
Okay. Well, I'm trying to remember the different kinds. Yeah. Okay. Okay, name all the different kinds right quick.
Oh, okay, hold on, let me. So you have these general ideas. There's diagonals.
Let me write this down.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'll tell you what, it's just, I picked ones that are mostly triangles, S shapes, and diagonals.
Okay, okay. So, triangle, S shape. Okay, I'm ready.
All right. I love this game. My students are so much fun with this. What do you think?
Diagonal?
This one? Yeah, I mean, it definitely has that for sure.
Is it right though?
I mean, I think this one has a few actually. So you have like this long diagonal that's driving you from up here to over here. And you also have this S-curve of this road and all these repetitions of the sizes of the people bringing you down into the foreground.
True, repetition.
What do you think about this Devil Man?
S shape. I don't know.
Yeah, he kind of has one. Yeah. No, you're right. It's like going from his arm down his back and out his tail. Yeah. I think this one is like a strong example of a triangle right here and like a long diagonal line.
Nice.
What do you think about Dracula versus Wolfman?
Would that be okay? Triangle?
Yeah! Bam! Right there in the foreground. Big and strong.
That's the first thing that came to my mind, but I had to think through it a bit more to make sure that it was right.
Yeah. Awesome. I think this one I just pulled because it was a wonderful example of frame within a frame.
Yeah.
And I just love Frank Frazetta paintings. I think they're great. This is my favorite Thanks for that training, by the way.
I could see the line of action, stuff drawing to stuff. Okay. Which one is this one?
I mean, this is definitely a very strong triangular setup.
Mm-hmm. Okay, point out the triangle for me.
So like starting up here-ish at the tippy top of him.
And then coming down like a long triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Equilateral.
Two big swooping lines that lead up to him, yeah.
Got it.
You've got the line of the sword, like leading you down through into the bears. Yeah. And I pulled some
I can see it now.
Yeah. I pulled some Batman backgrounds, but yeah.
Repetition?
Yep, definitely repetition. Okay. I'm gonna yeah, those are the last two of my guess that composition. But, yeah, so that's composition 101.
Nice.
There's so many more, and there's so much more to learn about it that I,
Yeah, like I was at a previous job, and I was kind of like art directing some rendered images we were doing for an artist, and I was leading a couple of guys, and they would be sending me like it could be anything from an animal to an object or something, and you're trying to pick good composition, and they would send me stuff, and I'm like, how do I teach them that this doesn't look good? Like the posing would be off, and it's like, why did you pick this pose? And I'm like, I can naturally see it, so like, how do I teach somebody how to see this? So I like went to like lynda.com, like, let me see if they got some composition tutorials or something, and tried to give them a quiz, because I'm like, are you looking at this before you send it to me?
That's rough.
Yeah, so it's hard to like, because obviously you learned it at some point, but then it's hard to figure out how to teach other people what you naturally see sometimes.
Oh, totally, yeah. Like you've learned it, you visually understand it, and you visually digested it and can understand when it's off or when it's not working, but explaining that's one of the most difficult things about teaching, I think, is that like I know it, but how do I tell you? How do I let you know? Well, I think it's like the second pillar of being a good storyboard artist is understanding acting. You have to be a visual actor with your characters, and you really need to understand them fully and how they would react in any given situation. It's a lot of character knowledge, a lot of character development, a lot of world development, and fully understanding how your characters would react in a given situation really helps tell your story and is super important. It doesn't just apply to like sad things or like overly acted things like film, things that go on in like stupid cartoons, like silly cartoons, like SpongeBob. Like it's also extremely important. And I think that using line of action is super important for that. I think one of the first classes that I had in college, we did gesture drawing, and it is basically throwing lines of action into your drawings. I'm pulling this up again, but being able to send like one big curve through a body to like give that pose a point and a pointed meaning to it is really helpful. So using body acting is super important for storyboarding, but also using like facial acting. The smallest minutia of detail in an eyebrow or an eye line makes all the difference in how your characters are looking and what they're looking at. I've gotten noted to death on eyebrows looking too angry. So, I mean, that's for a specific show with a very specific director and purpose. They didn't want them to ever look angry, even though they might act angry. Like they're acting really angry. They're legit yelling at somebody, but they're not angry. So it's like really difficult to tread that fine line of like what you feel like they should be doing and what they're actually doing, or what the director feels like they should be doing.
Yeah, I took a gesture drawing class in college, and in my notebook, you could tell like how it just loosened up. In the beginning, I'm just like and then towards the end of the class, it was all flowy, and I was getting better grades and stuff like that.
Yeah, being loose when you're storyboarding is really important, because you number one don't need to be super tight, and you number two like need to get things like this across that are more important than like being a super tight drawing,
Yeah, and then with the facial stuff, I was, in my last video with signing animation, she was talking about how you could tell when somebody's animating a deaf character and they're hearing, because when you're signing, you have like facial expression is really important when you're signing. And so there's like eyebrow stuff and just the facial kind of animation. And you could tell when a hearing person, because it's like the face is dead and all the concentration is on the hands. It's like, no, it's all encompassing.
Yeah, totally. Your face and your body goes into a lot of describing how a character is feeling or acting in a certain panel. And line of action definitely helps with that kind of stuff. These are some I just love looking at these SpongeBob ones. They're so good. And especially if you're doing like really cartoony stuff, you should push it. Like if you do it once, do it again and do it even more extreme and see how that feels. I feel like it's easier. I tell my students this a lot. It's easier to pull back when you have too much than it is to add more when you don't have enough. So start big and then go smaller if you need to. But especially in like kids cartoons, it's just funnier when they go the extra mile, I
think a big thing that beginners in any part of the animation pipeline don't really do is like editing or passes. Like you think you have to do it the first time, whether it's like animating or like storyboarding or something, like, oh, I did it once, but you're saying, okay, you storyboarded this character and their body, but now go and do it again, do it again, do it again. But I feel like, I guess maybe in this perfectionist world, we're like, oh, I have to do it once. Like, no, you do it multiple times and then push it. Because even the reason I go by BlkWmnAnimator, but I'm not an animator. The reason I didn't feel like I was a good animator is because I could see that I was not pushing it, but I don't know how many passes I would do.
Yeah, like I've said, I think it's easier to pull back than it is to add more. Yeah, it's a tough lesson to learn, and I don't think that it's absolutely everything you need to do multiple times, but I think that's the reason why in the animation pipeline we also have a million eyes that look at things. Like you have your supervisor, and then you have your director, and then you have the network, and then they all come back to you with notes, and that's like double, triple, quadruple checking to make sure that this is working and that it's the best that it can be.
Can you talk about the mentality of getting notes? Because I know as a beginner or a novice or new to the industry, you might be like, oh man, I didn't do it right. But it's like, no, you shouldn't stay committed to like what you turn in. Yeah. You kind of learn that through working if you don't already have that. But sometimes it's like, oh man, I got to edit this.
Right. I mean, it's your job. It is going to be your job. It's going to be a daily part of your job to get notes. Inevitably, unless you're the director, like the be-all, end-all director, like you're going to get notes. And even then, the network's going to give you notes. Unless you're the network, you're going to get notes. So when you're Nickelodeon, you won't get noted. But I think, and I also think it's an invaluable piece of becoming a better artist is taking critique and understanding why you got it.
Right.
Because it
And it's not a
inevitably
knock.
helps you improve.
It's not a knock against your skill, or it's not a knock.
No.
It's just like sometimes they just want something different. It's not even that you did it wrong. It's just that they had another thought in their head and they're like, now do this.
Right. Like, I mean, if your director comes to you and is like, why did you turn in this garbage? Maybe you need to reassess how well you did your job. But if your director comes to you and says, I think that we need to change these panels to this, it's not a knock on you as an artist or a knock on like your vision for it. It's just your director trying to make you better and make the piece conform to what the show is.
Yeah, because the director has that vision for what it needs to do, and you might not have that full vision, whether they don't explain it to you completely or whether it's just like not explainable until they see it. So it's like the director has the vision and you're trying to do their vision, not your vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the only time I've really hated it is when I've had directors who just can't tell me what they want. They just know that it's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, is to know that it's wrong, but like to be able, like we were just saying, like to be able to tell somebody why it's wrong and how it's wrong. I understand it's difficult, but that's why you become a director.
Yeah.
I feel like using words to communicate, I think communication is the number one thing about being a director. And if you can't communicate, then that's a fault on you as a director.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tell people, don't be coming to me with your problems if you ain't got no solutions. Like, how can I help?
Exactly. Like your director comes to you and is like, no, this is crap, fix it. And you're like, but what's wrong with it? Because like I did it and I thought it was good enough to turn in, you know?
Right.
So can you tell me what's wrong with it? You know? Yeah, I've had difficulty with that over my many years, but nobody's perfect. Directors need directors, and that's why they have the network. But yeah, anyway, carrying on with acting, I guess. I just love SpongeBob so much. And I think a lot of people default when they're getting started with boards to things like this panel, particularly. They're flat, straight on, there's no depth. And I think that it's not to say you can never do a panel like this. It's one of the many things that is like a rule that's made to be broken. There are very specific comedic instances where things like this are acceptable or the best way. But for the most part, you want to give your panels depth and variety and, you know, make them more exciting to look at. Doing flat stuff like this, like you could just look at it and it's extremely flat. There's also a really bad tangent. Do you know about tangents? I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Like he's like, look at it. It's glaring where his pants and the floor meet. That's another thing you need to keep in mind when you're doing your storyboarding panels is tangents, because they'll get you.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so avoiding flat things like this, and you know, like even in your poses. SpongeBob just looks like so stiff and robotic here, and if the episode is that SpongeBob suddenly turns into a cyborg, like this is an acceptable pose, but you know, otherwise, like SpongeBob is like a living, breathing cartoon character, and he has nice curves, and having straight angles with curves is like such a visually appealing thing, and I think that's another reason why artists like Shane Glines and oh my god, why am I blanking on him? Oh, Steven Silver, who did like designs for like Kim Possible and like Batman, like that style is very visually appealing because it's a lot of curves and very straight angles. And using that stuff in your poses is also visually a very good idea. And again, here's another idea of like pushing it. Like, sure, this is fine, but this is visually better, you know? giving it that twist. Patrick looks dumb here, but he looks way dumber when you've pushed his pose. Especially like, just, it doesn't even have to be like super huge, just a little bit. Just makes it 10 times better. Again, looking up, really looking up. There's different ways that you can push it to like get a different emotion out of it, you know?
Yeah, and another thing with seeing these like different before and after ones is like the silhouette that it provides as well.
Yeah. That was the first picture. Having good silhouettes and being clear in your storyboards is also extremely important. Because visually, like, I can't, you're trying to tell a story visually, and making sure that your viewer understands it clearly is really important. Obviously, every animation frame will not be this clear because animation has in-betweens that obviously can't be perfect.
Right.
But the main poses need to be very clear about what's happening.
Yeah, I can see it very obviously with the key example.
And the present. So one of my favorite exercises that I give my students is this retro boarding assignment. And it's to watch like your favorite film or your favorite cartoon. Find like a piece of it that you really, really like. Like there's a part of an episode that made it like your favorite episode. And watch it and board it. So like pausing on like the main parts of the scene and then copying that pose or copying that frame. Then you can like, you're visually like kind of like reinterpreting what the storyboard artist did for the show. So you can kind of like apply the things that visually appealed to you about it to like digest it and understand why it worked. I think it's a really, most artists learn by copying.
Right.
You know, obviously don't put it on your website and claim that you made those storyboards because you didn't, but you know, it's a really good exercise to try to learn, especially from the styles of shows that you already really like, how to be a better storyboard artist.
Yeah, I feel like in that exercise, you're kind of like downloading good technique and good storyboarding into your brain by copying it, and then it's now, if you do it a bunch of times, you kind of become to innately know because you have that download of, okay, this person did this, I'm gonna copy this, and when you put it to paper, like that physiology of like it's now in your body.
yeah, it's like muscle memory.
Yeah.
Another really good exercise to do is like I kind of like scour the internet for like scripts from shows or from movies, and like take a little blurb of it and then board it. I've used like stuff from like storyboard driven shows from like SpongeBob, which will just give you like a line, and you have to interpret that line into several jokes. And then stuff like I used some stuff from like We Bare Bears to do some exercises to like, you have the script, but you also have the visual telling of a joke. Storyboarding isn't all about jokes, but I like being funny. So, you know, yeah. And also do gesture drawings. Do gesture drawings all the time. Like do line of action. Make sure your silhouettes are clear. And, you know, don't be afraid to show people your stuff and get their opinion on it, because that's going to be, that's going to be,
you got to get used to getting a critique, like you said.
And inevitably, like somebody else might not have the best idea, but they have an idea and it makes you think about it. And maybe you take the idea they've given you and reevaluate what you've done, and inevitably make it better. So, yeah, storyboarding 101. I think I covered a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, please put them down in the comments. If you have anything else you want to learn from Chrissy, please put it down in the comments. We could possibly have her back.
Yeah, I'd love to come back.
And if you like what she did, tell her in the comments. Positive reinforcement.
Critique me. Be my director.
Yeah, you can critique too. Yeah. She could take it. So if you have any critique, if you have anything or additions to what we laid out in this video, and you want to punch it up, please put that down in the comments too. Chrissy, how can people follow you?
You can go to my website. It's ChrissyFellmeth.com. I don't have any of my storyboarding work up yet because I'm working on my portfolio. I'm just bad at it. And right, exactly. And I'd say follow me on Instagram, but I just post pictures of my cats and food. So
if you're into that, go follow her on Instagram.
Yeah, it's at GR8Ball.
Cool.
I occasionally post a drawing if I do one.
All right, to everyone out there, I want you to like so I know it's real, comment and tell me how you feel, subscribe to Seal the Deal, and sign up for post notifications to show your zeal. And I'll see you in the next video.
Bye.